I'm Dr. Margie LaCoultry, a former principal in the Knoxville City School System and the Knox County School System. And today is November the 2nd, 2010, and we're filming this interview from the Andrew Johnson Building in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's really my pleasure today to talk with Wanda Moody, who has served in various positions with the Knoxville City School System. And Wanda, I'll let you start out telling us about where did you grow up?
Well, I'm a native Knoxvillian, having gone to school, both elementary and high school in Knox County, and then following that went to the University of Tennessee and graduated in the College of Education.
So now where did you go to high school?
I went to Carnes High School.
Carnes, okay.
Of course, it was back in the old building, and the old building was the one that the gymnasium had burned. And at that particular time, the whole 4 years I was there, I did not have a single gym class.
Oh, my goodness.
So everybody talks about physical education. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we got our physical education by working at home on the farm.
Well, that was physical education.
That's right,
sure.
because I grew up on a farm.
Now, what elementary school did you go to?
I went to Cedar Grove.
Cedar Grove.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's on...
It was on Middlebrook Pike at the time. Of course, it's no longer there. As a matter of fact, on that particular site is the Post Office Credit Union.
Right. My dad built the gym, and then they tore all of that down. I thought, how in the world can you stand it? I said, Daddy, they're tearing it down. He says, as long as that money passes my hand, I don't care. But, all right, so you were... then part of that was county school system.
It was at the time I was there. It was all county school system, both schools, and then of course Cedar Grove became a city school later. Then.
Now, when you went on to get your higher education, what kind of degrees did you get? And
well, initially I received a bachelor's degree in education with an emphasis in language arts. And then immediately I started working on a master's degree, and I did the master's degree in special education with an emphasis or a major in speech and hearing. And as soon as I finished, though, I did this prior to finishing the bachelor's degree. But then as soon as I finished the bachelor's degree, I started teaching and taught for 1 year at Brownlow Elementary School, which of course is no longer there.
Right.
Well, it's no longer used as a school. It's there, but it's no longer used as a school. And then from there, the second year I went into special education and started doing speech therapy. And at that time, the program was an itinerant program, and I worked in about 4 or 5 different schools. And I did that for a number of years. And then special education was really just kind of beginning at that time.
What timeline was this about?
This was in 1952.
Okay.
52. And we grew some in the late 50s in that program. I was the only one for a number of years. And then finally we did expand, and I had 2 or 3 additional staff persons. And I kind of served as the head person in that program. Mm-hmm. And I guess it was really... There was something that happened in Knox County that I think had a tremendous impact upon schools, and especially did it have an impact as far as special education was concerned. And that was in 1963 when there was massive annexation of the schools. And during that massive annexation, Knoxville City Schools doubled in size. And included in that was 17 elementary schools and 4 high schools. And then as a result of that, that meant that we had to serve more children, and our staff did expand considerably at that time.
What were the 4 high schools?
The 4 high schools were Bearden, Holston, Central, and Young.
So those all came into the city?
They all came in with the 1963 massive annexation.
Have you got the elementaries written down? You share I think this is important in 1963 to know that did happen.
Yes, the elementaries were West Hills, Cedar Grove, Pond Gap, Rocky Hill, Pleasant Ridge, Ridgedale, West Haven, Norwood, Moreland Heights, Fountain City, Galbraith, Anderson, Smithwood, Sturkey, Chilhowie, Alice Bell, and Spring Hill.
My goodness. I know when I was at West Haven, they had the two serving places for the lunch program, and they had grades 1 through 8 before I got there, and whenever the county had that school, and I kept thinking, where did all these people go that went through these lines?
Right.
But then when they moved it in with the city, they had grades 1 through 5, and then of course we got the kindergarten in there later on.
Right. You'll notice I did not indicate any junior high or middle schools that were included in that annexation. And I think part of that was the very fact that the county had a student organization of 1 through 8 in the school, and then the 9 through 12 in the high schools, and did not have any junior highs or middle schools. And then, of course, later on, as you know, we've gone through. The city had junior highs, and then we changed to the middle school, and we've had a number of organizational programs.
Let me just ask your candid opinion. If you could change it to now to something, say going back to K through 8 and 4 through 12, would that be something you might consider?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so, because I think when you look at boys and girls who are 14 and 15, 13, 14, 15, that's a little old to be associated with elementary children, little kindergarten children. I think that. I would not recommend it.
They have such a period of time in there in grades 6, 7, and 8 where they, first of all, they get in there, they're afraid of everything, and then by the time they get to the 8th grade, they know it all. So
I sometimes wonder if part of the problem is we take boys and girls who leave the 5th grade, and they've been, for the most part, in a pretty structured environment, and then they end up sending them into an environment which has a lot more flexibility, and it requires the student to assume a great deal more responsibility. And I'm not sure they're quite able to do that.
that's true.
That rapidly. And I wonder if we don't need to do a little bit of modifying of it to let the children become a little bit more adjusted to that type of freedom.
Especially like being in the halls, and I think some of the teachers have begun to walk their students, especially in 6th grade, to the class and that kind
Right.
of thing.
I do think that's a difference.
Well, tell us who some of your heroes were when you were in the school system that helped you to move along.
There were a number of people that I felt very close to and were important, I guess. I think Paul Kelly was one individual that I know I had worked with Paul a great deal, and I appreciated him and his stand and what he tried to do for education and the commitment that he had for improvement of schools. Of course, even though I was in the city system, and as you know, there was some bit of animosity between the city and the county.
That's true.
I still had a great deal of admiration for Mildred Doyle. I could call her, even though I was a city employee, a school employee, I could call her and ask her, tell her I'd like to come down and meet with her to talk over something. And she was always kind to give me an appointment and very willing to discuss issues with me and so on. And that I did really appreciate that.
Wanda, let's back up now and do a little more about your special ed time of the school system.
Okay, in the early 70s, the state legislature passed legislation. It was known as Public Law 839, and it was the Mandatory Education of the Handicapped Act. And after the legislature passed it, of course, the State Department had the responsibility of trying to implement it, and they implemented it in phases. And we had 2 or 3 years to really become full-blown in the city schools. I must say that Knoxville City Schools had been on the cutting edge for a long time with various special education programs, but we had not gone as far as the state law mandated that we go. And as a result of that, that meant that the administration in the city schools was reorganized, and because there was it was a mandate, and I was placed in charge of the director of special education, and one of the big components that we had to do was dealt with the right of education for parents. We had to do more of involvement of parents. Then in addition to that, we had the responsibility of developing individualized educational programs for each child. And this was something that was very new. We also had the responsibility of seeing that the children were educated in what was called the least restrictive environment, which meant that we had to develop a whole continuum of programs, and that's where we started developing the resource program, and then some of the pull-out programs, and then where we also involved children in the special needs children in the regular classroom more. So. And then it wasn't long after that, Congress passed the 94-142, which was the federal mandate for education of the handicapped. We had to modify our program just a little bit to meet some of the legal requirements. And from an educational standpoint, we really didn't have to do much modifying. Most of it was notification and legal requirements. And of course, since we had already begun implementing the state mandate, we were able to move on and able to develop a program, pretty comprehensive program. And during that time, I guess that was in the early 70s, until 1981, which is the time that I retired from the school system and left. And that was the time that the Commissioner of Education asked me to come to Nashville to be the Assistant Commissioner for Special Programs. And I served in that capacity as far as the entire state was concerned and I was there for 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. And my chief responsibility was to help school systems throughout the state to develop their special ed programs.
Now, at that time that you were in the 80s, did you have many parents who wanted to sue for rights of their children?
Well, during the time that I was in the city schools, and I guess this must have been in 1980 and maybe 79, 80, 81, we had 2 or 3 hearings. And I never shall forget one hearing. We started late in the afternoon, I think at 4:30, maybe after school was out, and we concluded that hearing at, I think it was either 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We went straight through and did not stop for dinner or anything. We had a few that did. My goal was always trying to look at what are the needs of the child, and then secondly, where is the best place to try to meet the needs of that child. And part of the problem with that particular case was we didn't really have a program. This child had very unique needs, very, very special needs, and we didn't have a program in the city schools to meet that child's needs. And really, services had to be found elsewhere. And also during that time, I found that there were a number of children that we had to seek services outside of the school system.
Mm-hmm. And they're still doing that today, of course.
Yeah, of course, that's true. And then I think another thing that was happening is, in view of Knoxville's geography, and the mandate of both the federal and the state legislation, and there were some pretty severe penalties if school systems did not implement those programs, because this would mean then that they might, some of their other federal funds might be withdrawn, and some of their other state funds might be withdrawn. So school systems were under a pretty stiff penalty and charge for development of programs, and as a result of that, we ended up, a number of students from outlying areas came into Knoxville City in order to be able to take advantage of the programs that we did provide. And then frankly, we in Knoxville City did contract with other agencies to see that the needs were provided for those children.
So everybody just sort of try to help everybody else out and try to meet the needs.
Right.
What differences do you see now, maybe in funding of education, when you started and whenever you retired?
There's quite a bit. I think it's important to kind of go back if you want to look at it from a historical perspective of looking at Knoxville City. When I was first employed in Knoxville City, we had a charter provision, and that was that 50 cents out of the tax rate had to go to public schools, to the Knoxville City schools. But then that was also during the time that it became popular to pass sales tax referenda. And we had a local sales tax referendum, and it passed. And some of us in the school system were a little bit concerned about it. Some thought that, well, this is going to mean extra money for the schools. Yes, it did mean extra money for the schools. But in the meantime, a referendum was placed on the ballot to remove that charter amendment, which then took away that 50 cents that had been mandated. So, in essence, the schools at that time didn't really receive any additional money. But however, during the time my tenure in the city schools, we did see a lot of federal money coming in, and I think that's one of the big issues during the 60s and 70s in particular, where education became so important in the eyes of many legislators, both federal and state, and I think rightly so, many parents were asking for additional programs for children, and there was that emphasis upon trying to serve those that are underprivileged, and that's where a lot of the federal legislation came about. And that did provide some extra funds for the schools.
In looking back on your area of expertise, what was a success story that you might share with us?
Oh, gee, I hadn't thought about that. There are a number of people that I run into out in the community periodically. There's one little guy, let me share this one with you. He was a little guy that I taught in the head and speech therapy at Old Bell House School. You know where Old Bell House School was? Just down below the Andrew Johnson building.
That's right.
He was a sweet child, but he did have a problem. And I know I worked with him a great deal. We made a lot of improvement. I ran into him many years later, over at one of the banks as I was standing in line, and I immediately recognized him, and I spoke to him. And he looked at me, and he was shocked to think that I still remembered him, even though it probably had been 20 or 25 years since I had taught him, because he was in, I think, about the third or fourth grade at the time that I saw him. And he's been very prominent in the community and very involved in the community. And I run into him periodically now, and he's forever coming up to me and so thankful that he had that opportunity for those improvements.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had some time with the county commission, a lot of time. Can you tell us about how you impacted education through that?
Well, let me, before I answer that, let me kind of looking at chronology here a little bit. When I went to Nashville and worked for 2.5 years, came back in 84, and really came back because of some family obligations that I needed to take care of. And really hated to do that because I was having a good time and was thoroughly enjoying it. It was a real challenge to be able to see what you could do and how you could help local school systems develop programs, and that was really a lot of fun. But I came back to Knoxville, and then I started working for the city of Knoxville. And I had two responsibilities. One was serving with the social service agencies in the community as it relates to city government. And then in addition to that, working with the city in terms of looking at education in Knoxville City schools. And at that time, funds were very limited, and there was a interest in trying to see what could be done to improve. And as a result of that, we developed a broad-based group of community individuals cut across all socioeconomic and lines in terms of working with them to try to come up with input of things that could be done to improve the schools. And as a result of that, we developed what was called the blueprint for improvement in Knoxville City Schools. And then it was while I was working with that a number of people came to me and said, why don't you run for county commission? And I really hadn't thought about it at the time. And the more I thought about it, I thought, that's a pretty good idea. I think I'll do that. So that was in 1986. And I ran for county commission. And of course, one of the basic premises that I ran on was because of my knowledge of education and my having been involved. And at that time, education was so much on the forefront of improvement. So, I hope during that time that I was on commission, I was able to make a difference as far as schools go.
And you were on the commission how many years?
I was on commission for 20 years. I served from 86 to 2006.
Do you have a comment on, you weren't in the system at the time, but when we did the change in 1987?
Well, yes, I do. I said at the time, and I was chair of the Commission Education Committee at that time, and I kept saying at the time that I think what needs to happen is we need to look at, the county was doing some great things program-wise, the city was doing some great things program-wise, and my emphasis was, and I kept pointing out that I thought what we needed to do was we needed to look at the best practices in both school systems and then merge those into one school system and not let it be either a county school system or a city school system, but it would be the opportunity to take the best of both and come up with a really top-notch school system. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I know I have a number of friends who were in the city school system, and they were really very perturbed that the way things developed when the transition came about. And I think it set school education back in this community because that philosophy was not perpetuated.
Well, and then the change of teachers from,
Right.
To black to white and those kinds of things were along that, during the 1991, which picked up right after we changed the school system, that had an impact as well because
Right.
we wanted to meet the national mandate for us. And so that that was an interesting time of period to be in as well, which you were not involved with that either.
No, but I heard a lot about it. I heard a lot about it from both teachers and from parents, because as a county commissioner, people think they can call you up with every kind of problem, regardless of whether you can do a whole lot about it or not. So I heard a lot about it, and every opportunity that I had while I was on commission, and when we were discussing budgets or approval of programs and so on, I always tried to at least emphasize trying to do the best rather than just what was expedient.
Well, and the best for students.
Mm-hmm.
If you had an opportunity, do you have anything else you'd like to bring to us today that we haven't covered?
I think I think one thing I would like to kind of, I guess in kind of a summary sort of thing, is during that period, that 30-year period of 51 to 81, that period of time brought a lot of change as far as schools go. And I think a lot of that came from what was happening in the community, the scientific community, the federal mandates, the state mandates, and just the emphasis that parents were having on seeing the need for quality education. And then because of their seeing the need, then obviously some of these programs were developed. And certainly that was a very growing time as far as schools go.
And again, there was money involved with that as
Right.
well. So we had to work through that, through these programs that we needed. Education is ever changing. It should change.
Yeah, and I think people need to realize, to me, education and the schools really are just a small microcosm of the larger community. The problems that are going on in the larger community are oftentimes those that are manifested in the schools.
That's right. What's happening out there is coming in
Right.
right into that classroom.
That's right.
That's true. If you could do it over again, would you do it?
Yeah, I think I'd do it differently. I think I would. And I hope I would do it better. I hope I would do a better job than I did, because I hope I've grown and become more knowledgeable about how children learn and how you interact with adults and how you're able to motivate people to do things that I guess that comes with it comes with growing.
That's
doesn't
right. It does come with growing.
Right.
Well, whether you're a teacher in that classroom with the product,
Right.
or you're the principal working with the teachers, or if you're administrative staff, all of it still goes back down to the product.
That's right. And what's happening in the classroom is the key, I think. What goes on with those boys and girls. And we don't realize at times the decisions that we make, what impact that really does have on the children in the classroom. And I think I've become more aware of that as time has gone on. And I'm sure teachers today have more responsibility. There are more demands made of them. And one of the things that I hear teachers complain or talk more about is that they have so much paperwork, they don't have time to teach, and they miss the opportunity to bring out the creative aspect of boys and girls. And I think that's too bad. It's unfortunate that that's occurring now. But I hear teachers talking a lot about that these days.
And that starts down in kindergarten.
Right.
Because
right.
I had my grandson who brought home some words to know for reading in kindergarten, and I thought, what happened to the stations and learning how to get along with each other and those kinds of things? Wanda, back in the 70s, there was legislation that came around that had to do with Title IX. Would you share that with us? I think you were part of it.
Yes, as a matter of fact, equal opportunity for women was the Title IX program, which was legislation that was passed by Congress, making that women and boys and girls should have the same opportunities as boys had. And as a result of that, each school system, in that legislation, each school system was to develop and implement a Title IX program. And that meant then that we had to look at all of our employment standards, all of the ways that we, as far as discipline goes, all of the discipline procedures for girls as it relates to boys. We had to look at all of the programs that were provided, and this especially was true in the junior high and high schools because of the athletic programs. Each school system district had to have what was called a Title IX coordinator, and that was one of the extra jobs that I was assigned to, was to be that Title IX coordinator. And of course we followed and did all of the evaluations and comparisons and studies that the federal law mandated. And as a result of that, a number of programs were changed, especially in the athletics, as far as girls go. And I'm sure as a result of that, I'm speaking purely from my experience with Knoxville City Schools, but we even today in our colleges and so forth see that girls have more opportunities in athletics now simply because of Title IX. So Title IX did had a big impact on what was happening to programs and to people, women and girls in particular.
Well, and that was fair. We just
It
needed
was
to
fair.
hit it and move it along. That's true. That's how Pat Summitt's got her teams now.
Well, it is true. And then, of course, you go back and look at opportunities for women in terms of administration. There were very few opportunities for women in administration, and that was one of the areas that we had to look at carefully and make some changes on.
Well, in across the state, again, in that era, there weren't many superintendents,
Right.
and there weren't many support people.
And there were not many people in the superintendent's administrative staff. As a matter of fact, I was the first woman on the superintendent's staff in Knoxville City Schools.
That was an honor as well as a work thing.
It was, but I was the very first. You know, they would appoint women in lesser roles, but not to be on the superintendent's staff and involved in decision-making activities. And I know at times that some of the men didn't particularly like my position on things, but that was okay too. I think I upheld what I thought was right and the best as far as the system was concerned, regardless of whether they liked it or not.
Well, and professionally.
Right, and I tried to do it professionally, right.
Well, now you had another area that you did serve, was the Professional Negotiations Act, and you were, I think, on the administrative team, and then we had a teachers team. So tell us about how you felt about that first meeting, for instance.
The state legislature passed legislation that provided for, that you had to have a professional negotiations available, which meant then that the teachers had to vote in terms of whether they wanted to have professional negotiations or not. So after the voting was done among the teachers, of course it was agreed that we would do professional negotiations, which meant that we set up two teams. One team was that which represented the Board of Education, and the other one was which represented the teachers. And I was on the team that represented the Board of Education. We had the role of negotiating different items, dealing with salary and fringe benefits and work conditions and so on. But we had to kind of get ourselves in the shoes of school board members to kind of see, okay, is this something the school board wants to do and is willing to go along with? I was on the team that negotiated the first contract, and we negotiated, I never shall forget, one night we started usually after school, I think at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and we negotiated until about midnight one day. And it took us over a year to finally get the first contract. I think John McCook was the head negotiator, and he was so intent on being sure that we covered everything and that we were very, very careful, because he realized that whatever was negotiated in that first contract would be something that the school system would have to live with, probably not only for the next year, but for years to come.
Right.
And we did have a good contract. I think it did create some tension among staff members, both administration and at the teacher level. I personally didn't feel that negotiations was necessary as far as Knoxville City Schools was concerned. And the reason I say that is because I had always felt that the board would listen to administration and would listen to teachers, because back in the 60s, I was president of the local education association, and I know we met on a regular basis with members of the school board and discussed, whatever their concerns were, and we shared our concerns, and we tried to kind of mesh the two together and come up with a solid program. But apparently there were other school districts across the state who were more concerned with this, and I think that was the impetus for the passage of that legislation. But obviously we had to comply with it too.
Well, and it's hard to look at it from both the administrative part and from where the teachers, because they're seeing it up and you're seeing it down.
Right.
And they did have to come to that. I know there were a lot of teachers who were on the teams, and they had never done negotiating before.
Right.
And that was difficult. So both areas, both teams really had to work at it, and I'm sure the hours were long.
Well, they were, and it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of giving and taking and understanding and trying to realize that each group had a role to play, and that role was important and significant as far as the school system was concerned.
That's true. Well, those, the Title IX, of course, is still carrying women through because at the time they didn't
Right.
have those opportunities, and they should have. And then negotiations, of course, that's given to both sides an opportunity to say what they need. And sure, Knox City probably did have a good relationship with teachers, but as you said, and I've heard across the state, that wasn't true.
I think that's true. Right.
Well, you have given us a wealth of information. Somebody will look through this someday, and they'll get a piece for their research that they're doing, and they can thank Wanda Moody for
Well.
having shared her information with the school system and everybody. Thank you so
Well,
much.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it. And good luck.
Thank you.